Resident Evil 2's development history is a complete mess. It's very complicated and hard to follow, but I'm going to do my best to cover at least the most important points. If you like videos about video game facts and fun history, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and tick off that little bell so you know whenever I post something new. Alright, let's get going. Sweet Home is the granddaddy of all survival horror games, but it was made on the very primitive NES. Well, in 1996, Capcom decided they wanted to revisit the idea, but this time take advantage of the far more powerful hardware of the PlayStation 1.
What is this? Wow! What a mansion!
And that's how we ended up with Resident Evil 1, a story that revolved around Chris and Jill, who were exploring an abandoned mansion looking for their teammates. Capcom didn't have a lot of faith in the game. In fact, the budget was rather small and the team wasn't large at all. They thought the game was going to be rather unremarkable, and they were really shocked to find out that there was a huge hunger for a game like this. It was clear that audiences were hungry for more zombie survival horror, so about a month after the release of Resident Evil 1, Capcom started work on the sequel. It was decided that the story would be about a rookie cop and a college student trying to fight their way out of an infected city. Leon Kennedy is a rookie cop who is fighting to defend the police station, but after it's overrun, he has no choice. We follow Leon, Ada, and Marvin as they fight their way through the city in order to escape and find safety. Elsa's where things get a lot more interesting. She's a motorcycle-loving college student who's just returned after a vacation to find that her city has been destroyed. We follow her, John, Roy, and Sherry as they fight their way out of the city as well. So the team at Capcom got to work on their brand new game. Shinji Megami was to be in charge again, and he had decided that this was going to be the end of the story. Well, when the game was about 70% complete, management decided that they needed to speak up, and they had come to a decision. The supervisor stepped in and told Shinji Megami this wasn't going to be the conclusion. They hired on a new scriptwriter who was going to take control of the story in order to be able to tie it to the first story. He also wanted them to leave the door open so they could have more sequels. So, the team had to scrap almost everything they had worked on up until this point and start again.
Look, Ada, as an officer, it's my job to look out for you. But we're not going to get through this alive if we don't work together, okay?
All right. We'll do this your way for now.
This is where things get confusing, messy, but a legend is born. The team decided that they were going to scrap Elsa, and instead were going to replace her with Claire Redfield, who was Chris Redfield's sister, and this ensured that the stories were tied in a much more significant way. Swapping out a character isn't such a huge deal, but they went far deeper than that. They scrapped the majority of the locations and reworked the ones that they kept. In an interview, Shinji Megami said that he found the original locations to be rather dull and that they didn't elicit the fear that he was searching for. He wanted it to be more along the lines of the first game. And these changes didn't go unnoticed by the public. By the time it came to release Resident Evil 2, there was a lot of discussion about all the promotional materials. There were clips that featured Elsa fighting enemies that were scrapped in locations that no longer existed. There were also clips that were from the game that was finally released, which is what they were holding in their hands. But there was a third set of clips which featured Claire, but also showed Leon fighting enemies that weren't in the final build of the game. This immediately led to a lot of rumors, and audiences came to the conclusion that there must be 3 separate builds of the game. The original build, the final build, and a hybrid of the two. In fact, there may have been 7 different builds, but I couldn't find any information, so we're just skipping on past that. And so, the search for this elusive 1.5 began. The next 15 years were filled with confusion, lies, and misinformation within the community. There were rumors that the game had finally been found and was being sold privately, or that it was up for auction, or that it had already been sold and taken away so nobody would ever see it. And all of this continued with no real truth in sight. What was known is that Shinji Megami had said that the game was stopped at about 70% of the build, so people knew it was out there, they just didn't know how to get their hands on it. Until one day, when the build was finally found. I did try to figure out exactly how it all went down, but it seems like even the community can't come to a decision. It could have been that somebody who used to work at Capcom passed away and a computer was accidentally sold with the data inside, or it was a garage sale and a forgotten piece of hardware was sold that had it all in there, or it could have been an intentional leak. Either way, nobody really knows exactly how it all happened. But what we do know is that a group called Team iGas pooled their resources together in order to purchase this build so they could work on it and release it out to the public. As if things weren't confusing enough, it gets worse. You see, the community had been working as one up until now, trying to find this build so they could get it out into the wild. But now that it had been found, there was an argument emerging. Half of the group wanted the game to remain untouched and just be released the way that it was, while the other half of the group wanted Team iGas to work on the game in order to be able to make it come to its true form. So with all of this mess, just the cherry on top made it so much worse. Team iGas was working behind the scenes to figure out where all the pieces belong. You see, they wanted to release the most complete version of the game that they could, so they were taking on new members in order to assist with this. Well, one of these new members allegedly had taken the code and was attempting to sell it online privately. When Team iGas got wind of this, they decided that they had no choice. Their hand was forced, and they had to release the game. And that's how it got out in the wild.
Now go. But just go. Fine. But I'm coming back for you.
Resident Evil 2 had a lot of changes before its final build. Let's talk about the heroes. Leon is still a rookie cop to the RPD, but instead of coming into the city and discovering what was happening, he was in the brink of it. He was in the police department trying to protect it and barricade the building until everything collapsed. Marvin is no longer just a small role. Instead, he is fighting alongside Leon as they both try to escape. Ada is relatively the same character, still a double agent trying to betray everybody around her while Leon tries to find the good in her.
Sorry about that. When I saw the uniform, I thought you were another zombie.
Elsa is the original second protagonist of the story. She's a motorcycle-loving college student, and you can see her wearing a racetrack suit. This is something that carried over onto Claire, since we see Claire riding in on a motorcycle as well. John is a civilian that's trying to escape alongside Elsa, and if he looks familiar, it's because he is. He was later reworked and used as Robert Kendo, the gun shop owner. Sherry Birkin pretty much plays the same thing. And then there's Roy. It's known that he's an RPD officer, but outside of that, there's not really a lot of information. No one's been able to figure out exactly what role he plays within the story. The enemies were also changed quite a bit. Zombies had far less poly count, and the thinking behind this was, in order to have more zombies on screen, they had to make them less detailed so that the game wouldn't chug. The zombies were more complex in the way that they reacted. They were far more resilient and a lot harder to take down. There was also a demo that was released which featured visible damage on the zombies. The game featured different models to show different levels of damage. There was also a different variety of zombies. You can see one zombie wearing a miniskirt in an office-looking area, and the police zombies look very different. There are also cut enemies. There's an infected gorilla, which seems to act a lot like the hunters do in Resident Evil 1, and you can see Leon fighting him in certain areas. There's also concept art for a spider-like man enemy, but ironically none of these enemies were ever used in any other Resident Evil game, so they were completely scrapped. So after the developers at Capcom had done so much work, they were forced to scrap everything. But I, for one, am pretty happy because that's how we ended up with one of the top 3 Resident Evil games of all time. The whole story is filled with infighting, rumors, and a community coming together to bring a game back from the grave. But after everything is said and done, I still think it's really impressive that a game that was never released managed to have such a monumental status. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. I really appreciate your time, and if you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to hit that subscribe button and tick off that little bell so you know when I post things. I'm also on TikTok and I post shorts on here. Anyways, I'll see you in the next game.